Okay, here we're about to start the opening of the eyes, section 6 or segment 6, if you will. We've gotten all the way to page 274. We're going to try and clean it up and finish it now. All right, I'm going to go back, and even though it's a repetitive situation, I'm going to go back to page 274 in the first column where it says the Nirvana Sutra says halfway down the page, because that's important to have as a context of the balance of what I'm going to read. Ready? From page 274. The Nirvana Sutra says, World-honored one, today I have learned the correct view for the first time. World one, up until today, we all have been people of mistaken views. Myolo explains this by saying they themselves referred to the three teachings they had practiced until that time as mistaken views. The Great Concentration in Insight says, the Nirvana Sutra says, up until today, we have all been people of mistaken views. Mistaken is bad, is it not? Annotations, thank you. Annotations on the Great Concentration in Insight says, mistaken is bad, therefore let it be known that only the perfect teaching is good. There are two meanings involved here. First, what accords with the truth is to be accounted good, and what goes against the truth is to be accounted bad. This is the meaning from the relative viewpoint. Second, attachment to this viewpoint is bad, and transcending it is good. This is the meaning from the absolute viewpoint. From both the relative and absolute viewpoints, we should abandon all that is bad. To be attached to the perfect teaching is bad, and to be attached to the other three teachings is, of course, even worse. Now, that's when he's talking about the three teachings, or the perfect teaching and the three teachings, about Shakyamuni's teachings. Understand that that's what he's qualifying there. That's why I wanted to reread it. The goods and evils of non-Buddhist creeds, when compared with the Hinayana Sutras, all represent a bad way. Similarly, the good ways of Hinayana teachings and the four flavors and three teachings as well, when compared with the Lotus Sutra, are all mistaken and bad. The Lotus Sutra alone is correct and good. The perfect teaching of the sutras preached before the Lotus Sutra is so-called from the relative viewpoint. From the absolute viewpoint, it must still be counted as bad. Fundamentally, it falls into the category of the three teachings, and therefore it is bad in that sense as well. To practice the highest principles of the pre-Lotus Sutra teachings according to the sutras is still bad. How much more so then is someone who will take a work of insignificant doctrines like the Meditation Sutra, which cannot compare even with the Flower Garland and Wisdom Sutras, as the fundamental teaching? Such a person incorporates the ideas of the Lotus Sutra into the Meditation Sutra and urges people to ignore, abandon, close, and discard and believe only in the discard the Lotus and believe only in the Nimbutsu. That is what Honen and his disciples and lay supporters do, and they deserve to be called slanderers of the correct teaching. Shakyamuni Buddha, many treasures Buddha, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions came to this world to make certain the law will long endure. Honen and the other Nimbutsu priests throughout Japan declare that in the latter day of the law, going on to page 275, the Lotus Sutra will disappear before the Nimbutsu. Are such persons not the enemy of Shakyamuni, many treasures, and the other Buddhas? Concerning the third group of enemies, this is the three powerful enemies, considering the third group of enemies of the Lotus Sutra. The sutra says, or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement. This is again from the 20-line verse, or 20-verse line, whatever it is. Or there will be forest-dwelling monks wearing clothing of patched rags and living in retirement. Paraphrase, ... They will preach the law to white-robed laymen and will be respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possess the 6 transcendental powers, end of quote. And the 6th-volume Parinirvana Sutra states, there are also ikchantikas who resemble arhats, but who commit evil deeds. There are also arhats who resemble ikchantikas, but display merciful hearts. The ikchantikas who look like arhats spend their time slandering the correct and equal sutras to the populace. The arhats who look like ikchantikas, on the other hand, are critical of the voice hearers and go about preaching the correct and equal sutras. They address the populace saying, "You and I are all bodhisattvas." Why? Because each living being possesses the Buddha nature. But the populace will probably call such men ikchantikas. The Nirvana Sutra says, after I have passed away, after the former day of the law has ended and the middle day of the law has begun, there will be monks who will give the appearance of abiding by the rules of monastic discipline, but they will scarcely ever read or recite the sutras and instead will crave all kinds of food and drink to nourish their bodies. Though they wear the clothes of a monk, they will go about searching for alms like so many huntsmen who, narrowing their eyes, stalk swiftly. They will be like a cat on the prowl for mice, and they will constantly reiterate these words, "I have attained arhatship." Outwardly, they will seem to be wise and good, but within they will harbor greed and jealousy. And when they are asked to preach the teachings, they will say nothing, like Brahmins who have taken a vow of silence. They are not true monks. They merely have the appearance of monks. Consumed by their erroneous views, they slander the correct teaching. Myolo writes, and that was from, again, the Nirvana Sutra. Myolo writes, concerning people of this type, the third group is the most formidable of all. This is because the second and third ones are increasingly harder to recognize for what they really are. And Tung Chun states, the third part that begins, or there will be forest-dwelling monks, deals with members of the clergy who pretend to be sages and use their position so that they can act as leaders of all the other evil people. As for the members of the clergy who act as leaders of all the other evil people, where in Japan at present time should we look for them? On Mount Hei, in Onoji, in Otsu, in Toji, in Kyoto, in the temples of Nara, in the Kennin-ji in Kyoto, or the Jufuku-ji and the Kincho-ji in Kamakura? We must examine this carefully. Do the words refer to the monks of Inraku-ji on Mount Hei who wear helmets on their heads and are dressed in armor? Do they refer to the monks of Ono-ji who wear suits of mail and on their fivefold bodies of the law and carry weapons? But these men do not resemble the monks wearing clothes of patched rags and living in retirement that are described in the sutra, nor do they seem to be the type who are respected and revered by the world as though they were arhats who possessed the 6 transcendental powers. They are not like the men of the third group who, Myolo said, are increasingly harder to recognize. It would appear, therefore, that the words refer to such men as Shoichi of Kyoto and Ryokan of Kamakura. Even if they are identified as such, they should not hate. And by the way, Shoichi is a Zen dude. Shoichi of Kyoto and Ryokan of Kamakura. Even if they are not identified as such, they should not hate others. If they have eyes, they should examine the sutra texts and compare their own behavior with them. This is the top of page 276. The first volume of Great Concentration and Insight states, there has never been anything to compare to the brightness and serenity of concentration and insight. This is from the Makashikan. The first volume of On Great Concentration and Insight, which would be Myolo, states, from the time when Emperor Ming of the Han Dynasty dreamed at night of the Buddha down to the Ch'en Dynasty when the great teacher Tentai lived, there were many who participated in the Zen school and received the robe and bowl that were handed down. The supplement to Tentai's 3 major works explains this by saying, the handing down of the robe and bowl refers to the succession of Zen patriarchs from Bodhidharma on down. The 5th volume, don't forget, Zen is not about Shakyamuni's teaching, it's about Bodhidharma's teaching, and it's an interpretation by Bodhidharma of what Shakyamuni said. The 5th volume of Great Concentration and Insight states there is a type called Zen men. Let's get into these Zen men. There is a type called Zen men, but their masters and disciples are blind to the truth and lame in practice, and both masters and disciples will fall into hell. In the 7th volume we read, There are 10 ways necessary for understanding and practicing Buddhism correctly. Of these, except one, the 9 have nothing in common with the ordinary priests of the world who concentrate on the written word, nor do they have anything in common with the Zen masters who concentrate on practice. Some Zen masters give all their attention to meditation alone, but their meditation is shallow and false, totally lacking in the 9 ways. This is no empty assertion. Worthy persons of latter ages who have eyes to see will understand the truth of what I say. The 7th volume of On Great Concentration and Insight, Myolo, states, priests who concentrate on the written word refers to men who gain no inner insight or understanding through meditation, but concern themselves only with characteristics of the doctrine. Zen masters who concentrate on practice refers to, in other words, they're never seeking Buddhahood. They think that the written word, that's it, okay? They don't bring forth their Buddha nature, okay, to help people bring forth their Buddha nature. They're there to show them how much they know and how deep and heavy those thoughts are. Be so impressed. They don't do anything to make you a Buddha. They don't do anything to make you happy. They don't do anything to achieve world peace. He says again, I go to the top of page 276, second column. Zen masters who concentrate on practice refers to men who do not learn how to attain. Do not learn how to attain the truth and the corresponding wisdom that comes with learning that truth, but fix their minds on the mere techniques of breath control. Theirs is the kind of non-Buddhist meditation that fundamentally still retains outflows. Some Zen masters give all their attention to meditation alone means that, for the sake of discussion, Tentai gives them a certain degree of recognition, but from a stricter viewpoint, they lack both insight and understanding. The Zen men in the world today value only meditation as the way to realize the truth and have no familiarity with doctrinal teachings. In relying upon meditation alone, they interpret the sutras in their own way. They put together the 8 errors and the 8 winds and talk about the Buddha as being 16 feet in height. They lump together the 5 components and the 3 poisons and call them the 8 errors. They equate the 6 sense organs with the 6 transcendental powers and the 4 elements with the 4 noble truths. To interpret the sutras in such an arbitrary manner is to be guilty of the greatest falsehood. Such nonsense is not even worth discussing. The 7th volume of Great Concentration and Insight states, in the past, the Zen master of Ye and Lo became renowned throughout the length and breadth of China. When they arrived, people gathered around him from all directions like clouds. And when he left for another place, they formed a great crowd along the roads. Excuse me, let me start over. That's not 2 different people. The 7th volume of Great Concentration and Insight states, in the past, the Zen master of Ye and Lo, he's the Zen master of Ye and Lo, became renowned throughout the length and breadth of China. When he arrived, people gathered around him from all directions like clouds. When he left for another place, they formed a great crowd along the roads. But what profit did they derive from all this bustle and excitement? All of them regretted what they had done when they were on their deathbed. In the 7th volume of Great Concentration and Insight, we read, the text speaks of the Zen master of Ye and Lo. Ye is in Xingqiao and was the capital of the Qi and Wei dynasties. The founder of Zen caused Buddhism to flourish there and converted the people of the region. The great teacher Tentai, out of deference to the people of his time, refrains from naming anyone specifically. Lo refers to the city of Luoyang. The 6th volume Parinirvana Sutra says, the extreme is impossible to see. That is, the extremely evil deeds done by the Chantikas are all but impossible to perceive. Or, as Myolo has said, the 3rd group is the most formidable of all. This is because the 2nd group and 3rd ones are increasingly harder to recognize for what they really are. Those without eyes, those with only one eye, and those with distorted vision cannot see these three types of enemies of the Lotus Sutra who have appeared at the beginning of the latter day of the law. But those who have attained a portion of the Buddha eye can see who they are. They will address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders. And the Tongchun states, these men will appeal to the government authorities, slandering the law and its practitioners. In the past, when the middle day of the law was coming to an end, Gomyo, Shuen, and other priests presented petitions to the throne in which they slandered the great teacher Dengyo. Now, at the beginning of the latter day of the law, Ryokan, Nina, and others draw up false documents and presented them to the shogunate. Are they not to be counted among the third group of enemies of Lotus Sutra? Let me read that past. In the past, in the middle of the day of the law, when it was coming in, Gomyo, Shuen, and other priests presented petitions to the throne in which they slandered the great teacher Dengyo. We're now in Japan, right? Now at the beginning of the latter day of the law, Ryokan, Nina, and others drew up false documents and presented them to the shogunate. We're going to read that Gosho after we read this Gosho. Are they not to be counted among the third group of enemies of the Lotus Sutra? Nowadays, the teachers of the Nembutsu address the rulers, high ministers, Brahmins, and householders who support the Lotus Sutra, the Tendai Lotus School, saying, the principles of the Lotus Sutra are very profound, but our understanding is slight. The doctrine it teaches is extremely deep. Our capabilities are extremely shallow. Just as Great Concentration and Insight says, they object that it pertains to the lofty realm of the sages, something far beyond the capacity of one's own wisdom to comprehend. Again, the men of the Zen school say the Lotus Sutra is a finger pointing at the moon, but the Zen school is the moon itself. Once one has the moon, of what use is the finger? Zen is the mind of the Buddha. The Lotus Sutra is the word of the Buddha. After the Buddha had finished preaching the Lotus Sutra and all the other sutras, he held up a single flower and through this gesture conveyed his enlightenment to Maheke Shayapa alone. As a token of this tacit communication, the Buddha presented Maheke Shayapa with his own robe, which together with the enlightenment has been handed down through the 28 patriarchs of India and so on through the 6 patriarchs of China. For many years now, the whole country has been intoxicated and deceived by this kind of falsehood. So that I shouldn't have said, oh, that's BS. Again, the eminent priests of the Tendai and True Word schools, though nominally representatives of their respective schools, are in fact quite ignorant of their teachings. In the depths of their greed and out of fear of the courtiers and warriors, they compromise with the assertions of the Nembutsu and Zen followers and sing their praises. Long ago, many treasures Buddha and the various Buddhas who were emanations of Shakyamuni Buddha acknowledged their allegiance to the Lotus Sutra, saying that they would make certain that the law will long endure. But now the eminent priests of the Tendai school acknowledge the assertion that the doctrines of the Lotus Sutra are very profound, but the human understanding is slight. As a result, the Lotus Sutra exists in Japan today in name only. There is not a single person who actually practices it and attains enlightenment. Who can be called a votary of the Lotus Sutra? We see priests who burn down temples and pagodas and are exiled in numbers too great to count. And we see numerous eminent priests who fawn on the courtiers and warriors and are hated for it by the people. Can men such as these be called votaries of the Lotus Sutra? Because the predictions of the Buddha are not false, the 3 types of enemies of the Lotus Sutra already fill the country. And yet, as though to belie the golden words of the Buddha, there seems to be no votary of the Lotus Sutra. How can this be? How can this be? Of course, Nichiren's the votary. But let us consider, who is it who is cursed and spoken ill of by the populace? Nichiren. Who is the priest who is attacked with swords and staves? Nichiren. Who is the priest who because of the Lotus Sutra is accused and petitions submitted to the courtiers and warriors? Who is the priest who is again and again banished as the Lotus Sutra predicted? Who else in Japan besides Nichiren has fulfilled these predictions? But I, Nichiren, am not a votary of the Lotus Sutra because, contrary to the prediction, the gods have cast me aside. Who then in this present age will be the votary of the Lotus Sutra and fulfill the prophecy of the Buddha? The Buddha and Devadatta are like a form and its shadow. In lifetime after lifetime, they are never separated. Prince Shotoku and his archenemy Moriya appeared at the same time like the blossom and calyx of this lotus. If there exists a votary of the Lotus Sutra, then the three types of enemies are bound to exist as well. The three types of enemies have already appeared. Who then is the votary of the Lotus Sutra? Let us seek him out and make him our teacher. As the Lotus Sutra says, to find such a person is as rare as for a one-eyed turtle to chance upon a piece of driftwood with a hole just the right size to hold him. Someone may raise questions. It would surely appear that the three types of enemies are present today, but there is no votary of the Lotus Sutra. If one were to say that you, Nichiren, are the votary of Lotus Sutra, then the following serious discrepancies would become apparent. The Lotus Sutra states, the young sons of heavenly beings will wait on him and serve him. Swords and staves will not touch him, and poison will have no power to harm him. It also reads, if people speak ill of and revile him, their mouths will be closed and stopped. And it states, they who have heard the law will will enjoy peace and security in their present circumstance and good circumstances in their present existence and good circumstances in future existences. It also states, if there are those who trouble and disrupt the preachers of the law, their heads will be split into 7 pieces like the branches of the ajaka tree. Furthermore, it reads, in this present existence, they will, the practitioners of the Lotus Sutra. Furthermore, it reads that in this present existence, they, the practitioners of the Lotus Sutra, will gain the reward of good fortune. And it adds, if anyone sees a person who accepts and upholds this sutra and tries to expose the faults or evils of that person, whether what he speaks is true or not. So all of you that want to slander me, be very careful here. Let's go up again. If anyone sees a person who accepts and upholds this sutra and tries to expose the faults or evils of that person, whether what he speaks is true or not, he will in his present existence be afflicted with white leprosy. How do you explain these discrepancies? Answer. These doubts of yours are most opportune. I will take the occasion to clear up the points that puzzle you. The never disparaging chapter of the Lotus Sutra states, they spoke ill of him, Bodhisattva never disparaging, and cursed him. And again, some among the group would take sticks of wood or tiles and stones and beat and pelt him. The Nirvana Sutra states, they will even kill him or do him injury. The Lotus Sutra states, since hatred and jealousy toward this sutra abound, at the top of page 279, even when the thus come one is in the world, how much more so will this be after his passing? The Buddha encountered acts of hostility known as the 9 great ordeals, such as being wounded on the toe by Devadatta, and yet he was a votary of the Lotus Sutra, was he not? And Bodhisattva never disparaging, who, as we have seen above, was cursed and beaten. Was he not a votary of the one vehicle teaching? Malgayana, who was beaten to death by a Brahmin group called Bamboo Staff sometime after the Lotus Sutra predicted that he would attain Buddhahood in a future life. Among the 25 leaders in the lineage of Buddhism, the 14th, Bodhisattva Aradeva, and the 25th, the Venerable Arashima, were murdered. Were these men not votaries of the Lotus Sutra? Chu Tao Xing was banished to a mountain in Shu Chao, and Fao Tao was branded on the face and exiled south of the Yangtze River. Were these men not upholders of the one vehicle teaching? Among scholars of secular learning, both Po Chui and Sugawara no Michizane, who was posthumously revered as the god of Kitano Shrine, were exiled to distant places, and yet were they not worthy men? If we consider the second part of your question, we must note the following points. Those who did not commit the error of slandering the Lotus Sutra in their previous existences will become votaries of the Lotus Sutra in their present lives. If such persons should be subjected to persecution under a false charge of having committed worldly offenses, then those who persecute them ought to suffer some kind of immediate retribution. It should be like the case of the Asuras who shoot arrows at Shakra, or the Garuda birds who try to eat the dragon of the Anavatapta lake, but who both invariably suffer injury themselves instead. Let me go back. It should be the case of the Asuras who shoot arrows at Shakra, or the Garuda birds that try to eat the dragon of Anavatapata lake, but who both invariably suffer injury themselves instead. And yet Tendai says, the ills and pains I suffer at present are all due to causes in the past, and the meritorious deeds that I do in my present life will be rewarded in the future. Likewise, the Contemplation on the Mind Ground Sutra states, if you want to understand the causes that existed in the past, look at the results as they are manifested in the present. And if you want to understand what results will be manifested in the future, look at the causes that exist in the present. The never disparaging chapter of the Lotus Sutra says, when his offenses had been wiped out, this indicates the Bodhisattva never disparaging was attacked with tiles and stones because he had in the past committed the offense of slandering the Lotus Sutra. Next, we should note that persons who are inevitably destined to fall to hell in their next existence, even though they commit grave offenses in this life, will suffer no immediate punishment. The Akchantikas are examples of this. The Nirvana Sutra states, Bodhisattva Keshayapa said to the Buddha, World-honored one, as you have described, the rays of the Buddha's great nirvana enter the pores of all living beings. It also states, Bodhisattva Keshayapa said to the Buddha, World-honored one, how can those who have not yet conceived a desire for enlightenment create the causes that will lead to enlightenment? In reply, the Buddha said to Keshayapa, there may be persons who listen to the Nirvana Sutra and yet claim that they have no need to conceive a desire for enlightenment and instead slander the correct teaching. See, we all have to conceive a desire for enlightenment. Okay. And yet claim they have no need to conceive a desire for enlightenment, instead slander the correct teaching. Such persons will immediately dream at night of demons, and their hearts will be filled with terror. The demons will say to them, how foolish you are, my friend. If you do not set your mind on enlightenment now, your lifespan will be cut short. Those persons quake with fear, and as soon as they wake up from their dream, they set their minds on enlightenment. And you should know that such persons will become great bodhisattvas. Pardon me. In other words, although one might slander the correct teaching, if one is not an unspeakably evil person, one will be warned at once in a dream and will have a change of heart. You can change your fundamental behavior in this lifetime. You don't have to go into a next lifetime and have all that causality hit you in the face. According to the Nirvana, we've already heard many examples of him qualifying this. Even the priests that debated Shakyamuni and the priests that debated Dengyo, they all, once they went, okay, you whipped my butt, they mitigated those slanders, okay? So that's the key, is that you have to acknowledge your mistakes and commit yourself to the truth and teach the truth to others and help them remove the errors of their understanding. Okay, page 280, first full paragraph. First column. According to the Nirvana Sutra, the Akchantikas, on the other hand, are likened to dead trees or stony mountains that can never bring forth growth. They are scorched seeds that, although they encounter the sweet rain, will not grow. Bright pearls have the power, when put into turbid water, to change it into clear water. But when thrown into the mud of Akchantika, they cannot purify it. They are like persons without a wound on their hands, when the sutra says, if a person with a wound on his hand handles poison, it will enter his body, but it will not enter the body of a person without a wound. Just as torrents of rain cannot remain, in other words, they don't immediately see their retribution. Just as torrents of rain cannot remain suspended in the sky, so the rain of the law cannot remain in the sky of the Echantika. Through these various similars, we know that the Echantikas of the, through these various similars, we can know that Echantikas of the most evil type will invariably fall into the hell of incessant suffering in their next life. Therefore, they do not suffer any immediate punishment in this life. They are like the evil rulers of ancient China, King Xie of the Shi dynasty and King Chao of the Yin dynasty. During their reigns, heaven did not display any unusual manifestations as warnings. That was because their offenses were so grave that their dynasties were already destined to perish. Third, it would appear that the guardian deities have deserted this country, and this is probably one reason why offenders do not suffer any immediate punishment. In an age that slanders the law, guardian deities will take their leave, and the various heavenly gods will cease to lend their protection. That is why the votaries of the correct teaching do not receive any sign of divine favor, but, on the contrary, encounter severe difficulties. The Golden Light Sutra, and this is in the top of page 280, second column. The Golden Light Sutra, the Golden Light Sutra says, those who perform good deeds day by day languish and dwindle in number. We are living in an evil country and an evil age. I have discussed all of this in detail in my work entitled On Establishing the Correct Teaching for the Peace of the Land. And if you looked around the world right now, you'd have to say we're in an evil age again. This I will state, he says, on page 280. First full paragraph, second column, after he's laid down all this other stuff. This I will state, let the gods forsake me, let all persecutions assail me, still I will give my life for the sake of the law. Shariputra practiced the way of the Bodhisattva for 60 kalpas, but he abandoned the way because he could not endure the ordeal of the Brahmin who begged for his eye. Of those who received, by the way, Brahmin said, he said, I'll give you anything the Brahmin says, give me your eye. And he gouged his eye out for the Brahmin and got kind of pissed off that he had to do that. Of those who received the seeds of Buddhahood in the remote past, and those who did so from the sons of the Buddha of great universal wisdom excellence, many abandoned the seeds and suffered in hell for long periods of numberless major world system dust particle kalpas and major world system dust particle kalpas, respectively, because they followed evil companions. When tempted by good or threatened by evil, if one casts, or tempted by good, let me say it again, because these are both things that can get you. When tempted by good or threatened by evil, if one casts aside the Lotus Sutra, one destines oneself for hell. That's a very important sentence. I'm going to say it again. Whether tempted by good or threatened by evil, if one casts aside the Lotus Sutra, one destines oneself for hell. One, you did it to yourself. You always do it to yourself. Here I will make a great vow, the Daishonin says, though I might be offered the rulership of Japan, if I would only abandon the Lotus Sutra, accept the teachings of the Meditation Sutra, and look forward to rebirth in the Pure Land, though I might be told that my father and mother will have their heads cut off if I do not recite the Nimbutsu, whatever obstacles I might encounter, so long as persons of wisdom do not prove my teachings to be false, I will never yield. All other troubles are no more to me than dust before the wind. I will be the pillar of Japan. I will be the eyes of Japan. I will be the great ship of Japan. This is my vow, and I will never forsake it. Top of page 281. Question. How can you be certain that the exiles and sentences of death imposed on you are the result of karma created in the past? Answer. A bronze mirror will reflect color and form. The first emperor of the Qin dynasty had a lie-detecting mirror that would reveal offenses committed in this present life. The mirror of the Buddha's law makes clear the causal actions committed in the past. The Parinirvana Sutra states, good man, because people committed countless offenses and accumulated much evil karma in the past, they must expect to suffer retribution for everything they have done. They may be despised, cursed with an ugly appearance, be poorly clad and poorly fed, seek wealth in vain, be born to an impoverished and lowly family, or one with erroneous views, or be persecuted by their sovereign. They may be subjected to various other sufferings and retributions. It is due to the blessings obtained by protecting the law that they can diminish in this lifetime their sufferings and retribution. Okay, let me say a very important sentence. It is due to the blessings obtained by protecting the law. That means doing shakabuku. Okay, that's what protecting the law is. When you hear the incorrect teaching being spoken, you correct it. It is due to the blessings obtained by protecting the law that they can diminish in this lifetime their sufferings and retribution. This is how you become a Buddha in your present form. This passage, this sutra passage, and my own experience, the Daishonin says, tally exactly. But now all the doubts that I have raised earlier should be dispelled. He says, everything I've said about me to give you the benefit of the doubt, you should already understand what's going on here by what I've already said. This sutra passage and my own experience tally exactly. For last paragraph of page 281, first column. This passage, sutra passage and my own experience tally exactly. By now, all the doubts that I have raised earlier should be dispelled, and thousands of difficulties are nothing to me. Let me show you phrase by phrase how the text applies to me. They may be despised, or as the Lotus Sutra says, people will despise, hate, envy, or bear grudges against them. And in exactly what manner I have been treated with contempt and arrogance for over 20 years. They may be cursed with an ugly appearance. They may be poorly clad. These two appear to me. These two apply to me. They may be poorly fed. That applies to me. They may seek wealth in vain. That applies to me. They may be born to an impoverished and lowly family. That applies to me. They may be persecuted by their sovereign. Can there be any doubt that the passage applies to me? The Lotus Sutra says again and again we will be banished. And the passage from the Parinirvana Sutra says they may be subjected to various other sufferings and retributions. These passages also apply to me. The passage also says it is due to the blessings obtained by protecting the law that they can diminish in this lifetime their suffering and retribution. The 5th volume of Great Concentration and Insight, Tentai, has this to say on the subject. The feeble merits produced by a mind only half intent on the practice cannot alter the realm of karma. Whoa, what did that just say? Let's read it again. The feeble merits produced by a mind only half intent on the practice cannot alter the realm of karma. So if you want to change your karma, you have to have a sincerity in desiring that. When we first start chanting, we're never that deep into all this. We just want benefits, okay? And it's okay to just want benefits, and we keep wanting benefits throughout the course of our entire existence because we want to prove the power of the law. But the key is that we cannot pursue this from anything other than a pursuit of Buddhahood. That's what will get you all the way there. I'll say it again and then continue. The feeble merits produced by a mind only half intent on the practice cannot alter the realm of karma. You can change the karma of not being able to be the Buddha in your present form because you haven't made the cause for it to making those causes in this lifetime and doing it. That's the point. But if one carries out the practice of concentration and insight so as to observe health and illness, then one can alter the cycle of birth and death in the realm of karma. It also says, as practice progresses and understanding grows, okay, so now you're on the path to making all this great stuff happen in your life forever. The 3 obstacles and 4 devils emerge in confusing form, vying with one another to interfere. Last full paragraph on 281, second column. From the beginningless past, I have been born countless times as an evil ruler who deprived the votaries of the Lotus Sutra of their robes and rations, their fields and crops, much as the people of Japan in the present day go about destroying the temples dedicated to the Lotus Sutra. In addition, countless times I cut off the heads of the votaries of the Lotus Sutra. In some of these grave offenses I have already paid for, but there must be some that are not paid for yet. Even if I seem to have paid for them all, there are still ill effects that remain. When the time comes for me to transcend the sufferings of birth and death, it will be only after I have completely freed myself from these grave offenses. My merits are insignificant, but these offenses are grave. If I practice the teachings of the provisional sutras, then these retributions for my past offenses would not appear. When iron is heated, if it is not strenuously forged, the impurities in it will not become apparent. Only when it is subjected to the tempering process again and again will the flaws appear. When pressing hemp seeds, and one does not press very hard, one will not get much oil from them. Likewise, when I vigorously berate those throughout the country who slander the law, what he's saying there, when I do shakabuku on those people, when I vigorously berate those throughout the country who slander the law, I meet with great difficulties because I'm doing shakabuku. It must be that my actions in defending the law in this present life are calling forth retributions for the grave offenses of my past so they can be expiated in this lifetime. If iron does not come into contact with fire, it remains black. But if it contacts fire, it turns red. If you place a log across a swift stream, waves will pile up like hills. If you disturb a sleeping lion, it will roar loudly. The Nirvana Sutra says it's like the case of a poor woman. This is an important little story. The Nirvana Sutra says, this is page 282 in the middle, first column. The Nirvana Sutra says it is like the case of a poor woman. She has no house to live in and no one to aid or protect her. And in addition, she is beset by illness, hunger, and thirst. She wanders through various places begging for a living. While staying at an inn, she gives birth to a baby, but the master of the inn drives her away. Though the baby has just been born, she takes it up in her arms and sets out, hoping to journey to another land. But along the way, she encounters fierce wind and rain, and she is troubled by cold and bitten by mosquitoes, gadflies, hornets, and poisonous insects. Coming at length to the Ganges River, she clasps her child in her hands and begins to cross it. Although the current is very swift, she will not let go of her child. And in the end, both mother and child are drowned. But through the merit that the woman gained by her loving tenderness, she is reborn after her death in the Brahma heaven. Manjushri, if there are good men who wish to defend the correct teaching, they should emulate this poor woman crossing the Ganges who sacrificed her life because of her love for her child. Good men, the bodhisattvas who guard the law, should behave in this way. Again, this is one of my favorite. This is from, he quotes this also in the Risho on Kokoran. This is a story about when you're being attacked, dress like you're going to be. Be prepared that you're going to be. Don't sit there like Jesus. We're not looking to be crucified. We're looking to kick some ass. Okay? Manjushri, and all of this is coming from the Nirvana Sutra. Manjushri, if there are good men who wish to defend the correct teaching, shakabuku, they should emulate this poor woman crossing the Ganges who sacrificed her life because of her love for her child. Good man, the bodhisattvas who guard the law should behave in this way. Top of page 282, second column. They should not hesitate to give up their lives. Then, although they do not seek emancipation, emancipation will come of itself, just as the poor woman, though she did not seek to be reborn in the Brahme heaven, was nevertheless reborn there. The great teacher Chang'an interprets this story from the Nirvana Sutra in terms of the three obstacles. Observe how he does this. The fact that the woman is called poor indicates that the person does not have the treasure of the law. The fact that she is identified as a woman indicates that the person has a measure of tenderness. The inn signifies an impure land. The child she bears is the heart that has faith in the Lotus Sutra, or the wisdom that perceives one's inherent Buddha nature. That's why she would never let go of it, even if it meant dying. Being driven out of the inn by its master signifies that the person is exiled. The fact that the baby has just been born means that very little time has passed since the person began to have faith in the Lotus Sutra. The fierce wind the woman encounters is the imperial decree sentencing the person to exile. The mosquitoes, gadflies, and other insects are the many ignorant people who will curse and speak ill of us, the votary of the Lotus Sutra. The fact that the mother and child are drowned indicates that, though in the end the person had his head cut off, he never renounced his faith in the Lotus Sutra. Being reborn in the Brahme heaven means being reborn in the realm of Buddhahood. Clear? The power of karmic rewards extends to all of the 10 worlds, even to the realm of Buddhahood. Even though one might go around killing people throughout the provinces of Japan and China, if one does not commit any of the 5 cardinal sins, or does not slander the law, one will not fall into, one does not commit any of the 5 cardinal sins or does not slander the law, one will not fall into the hell of incessant suffering. Yet one must go through other evil paths for a period of numerous years. Top of page 283. And by golly, we're getting close. For a period of numerous years. Even if one observes 10,000 precepts and performs 10,000 good deeds, if one does so with a mind only half intent, one cannot be reborn in any heaven of the world of form. To be born a king in the Brahme heaven of that world, one must add the spirit of compassion to one's karma that is laden with outflows and draws one to the world of humanity. The poor woman in the sutra passage was reborn in the Brahme heaven because of her concern for her child. Her case is different from the nature of causality that is commonly known. Chang'an offers 2 interpretations of it, but in the end, it is nothing other than the loving kindness with which the woman cares for her child that makes the difference. Her concern concentrates on one thing, just like the Buddhist practice of concentration, the child, the heart of the Lotus Sutra, what I just explained here, okay? Her concern concentrates on one thing, just like the Buddhist practice of concentration on the attainment of the way. She thinks of nothing but her child, which is similar to Buddhist compassion. That must be why, although she created no causes to bring it about, she was reborn in the Brahme heaven. The path to Buddhahood is not to be found in the flower garland doctrine of the phenomenal world as created by the mind alone, in the 8 negations of the 3 treatises school, in the consciousness-only doctrine of the Dharma characteristic school, or the true word type of meditation on the 5 elements of the universe. Only the Tentai doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life is the path to Buddhahood. Even in the case of this doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, we do not possess the kind of wisdom and understanding to comprehend it fully. Nevertheless, among all the sutras preached by the Buddha during his lifetime, the Lotus Sutra alone contains this jewel, that is, the doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single moment of life. The doctrines of the other sutras are merely yellow stones that appear to be jewels. They are like sand from which you can extract no oil, no matter how hard you squeeze it, or a barren woman who can never bear a child. Even a wise person cannot become a Buddha through the other sutras. But with the Lotus Sutra, even fools can plant the seeds that lead to Buddhahood. As the sutra passage I have quoted earlier puts it. Although they do not seek emancipation, emancipation will come of itself. And now the famous quote from this Ghost Show. Page 283, middle on the second column. Although I and my disciples may encounter various difficulties, if we do not harbor doubts in our hearts, we will, as a matter of course, attain Buddhahood. Do not have doubts simply because heaven does not lend you protection. Do not be discouraged because you do not enjoy an easy and secure existence in this life. This is what I have taught my disciples morning and evening, and yet they begin to harbor doubts and abandon their faith. Foolish men are likely to forget the promises they have made when the crucial moment comes. Some of them feel pity for their wives and children and grieve at the thought of parting from them in this life. In countless births throughout many long kalpas, they have had wives and children, but parted from them in every existence. They have not done so willingly and not because of their desire to pursue they have done so unwillingly and not because of their desire to pursue the way of the Buddha. Since they must part with them in any case, they should remain faithful to their belief in the Lotus Sutra and make their way to Eagle Peak so they may lead their wives and children there as well. Question: you insist that the followers of the Nimbutsu and Zen schools will fall into the hell of incessant suffering. This shows that you have a contentious heart. You yourself are in danger of falling into the realm of the Asuras. Moreover, it is said in the Peaceful Practices chapter of the Lotus Sutra, he should not delight in speaking of the faults of other people or scriptures. He should not display contempt for the other teachers of the law. It is because you, Nichiren, are going against this passage in the sutra that you have been abandoned by heaven, is it not? Actually, this is why we do Shakabuku. That was all Shakabuku. He would bitch it. The person was saying, you doing Shakabuku. You're just, no. Answer. On Great Concentration and Insight says there are two ways to spread the Buddhist teachings. The first is called shoju, and the second is called shakabuku. When the Peaceful Practices, the 13th chapter, says that one should not speak of the shortcomings of others, it is referring to the shoju method. But when the Nirvana Sutra says that one should carry swords and staves, or that one should cut off their heads, it is referring to the shakabuku method. They differ in approach in that one is lenient and the other severe, but they both bring benefit. On Great Concentration and Insight, Myolo states, with regard to the two ways of spreading the Buddhist teachings, the passage from the Nirvana Sutra, carry swords and staves, is found in the 3rd volume where it says, defenders of the correct teaching need not observe the 5 precepts of practice, the rules, defenders of, this is also from the Risho and Kokuran, it's also quoted there. Defenders of the correct teaching need not observe the 5 precepts. Defenders of the correct teaching need not observe the 5 precepts or practice the rules of proper behavior. Rather, they should carry knives and swords, bows and arrows, halberds and lances. And later on, the sutra tells King Sinyo, who put to death those who slandered the correct teaching. It also mentions how the new physician, explaining that the medicine from milk prescribed by the old physician was dangerous, forbade its usage, saying, if anyone takes any more of this medicine, he shall have his head cut off. These passages also demonstrate how the method of shakabuku should be applied to persons who go against the law. All the sutras and treatises deal with one or the other of these two methods. Okay? Do you understand what that just said? Let me go back again one more time. On Great Concentration and Insight, Myolo explains, with regard to the two ways of spreading the Buddhist teachings, shoju and shakabuku, the passage from the Nirvana Sutra, carry swords and staves, is found in the 3rd volume where it says defenders of the correct teaching need not observe the 5 precepts or practice the rules of proper behavior. If you're propagating the law, you don't have to worry about every other little thing that you do. It's automatically eliminated through that cause that you're making by defending the correct teaching and doing shakabuku and upholding the correct teaching versus incorrect teachings. All right, that's what this is all going to say. Rather than carry swords and knives and swords, bows and arrows, halberds and lances. And later on, the sutra tells King Shoyo, who put to death those who slandered the correct teaching. It also mentions how the new physician, explaining that medicine from milk prescribed by the old physician was dangerous, forbade its usage, saying, if anyone takes any more of this medicine, he shall have his head cut off. These passages also demonstrate how the method of shakabuku should be applied to persons who go against the law. All the sutras and treatises deal with one or the other of the two methods. Continuing on page 284, the bottom of page of the first column. The words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra reads, question, the Nirvana Sutra clearly states that one should associate closely with the ruler, bearing bows and arrows and helping overthrow evil persons. And yet the Peaceful Practices chapter of the Lotus Sutra says that one should stay away from persons in power and should behave with humility and loving kindness. There seems to be a major contradiction between the sternness of one approach and the gentleness of the other. Why should they differ so? Answer. The Nirvana Sutra speaks mostly about the shakabuku approach, but it also mentions dwelling in the state where one looks on all living beings as one's own children. Could it say so if it did not also have the shoju approach? If it did not have the shoju approach? The Lotus Sutra is mainly concerned with the shoju approach, as in the Peaceful Practices chapter. But in the Dharani chapter, there is also the curse on those who trouble the practitioners of the law that says they will have their heads split into 7 pieces. Could it say so if it did not have the shakabuku approach? Both sutras employ one or the other of the two methods depending on the context. The method chosen should be that which accords with the time. The annotations on the Nirvana Sutra states, when monks or laymen are defending the law, the most important thing, the annotations on the Nirvana Sutras by Chang'an. When monks or laymen are defending the law, the most important thing is for them to adopt the proper basic mental attitude. They should disregard external details, stick to the principles, and in this way spread the teachings of the Nirvana Sutra. Therefore, it says that defenders of the correct teaching need not abide by petty regulations. And that is why it says they need not practice the rules of proper behavior. Maybe why I've gotten away with what I've gotten away with. In past times, the age was peaceful and the law spread throughout the country. At that time, it was proper to observe the precepts and not to carry staves. But now, the age is perilous and the law is overshadowed. Therefore, it is proper to carry staves and to disregard the precepts. If both past and present were perilous times, then it would be proper to carry staves in both periods. And if both past and present were peaceful times, then it would be proper to observe the precepts in both of them. You should let your choices be fitting and never adhere solely to one or the other. It should be based on whether or not the law is being slandered in that place. That's when you do shakabuku. Do you understand? Okay. Top of page 285, first full paragraph, first column. I suppose the learned priests of the time think it only natural that one should have doubts about this. Therefore, no matter how I explain and try to persuade my own disciples, they still cannot seem to overcome their doubts, but behave like echantikas or persons of incorrigible disbelief. Therefore, I have quoted these passages of explanation from Tiantai, Mielo, and others in order to silence their ungrounded criticisms. These two methods of shoju and shakabuku are like fire and water, or water and fire. Fire hates water and water detests fire. The practitioner of shoju laughs with scorn at shakabuku. The practitioner of shakabuku laments at the thought of shoju. When the country is full of evil people without wisdom, then shoju is the primary method to be applied, as described in the Peaceful Practices chapter. But at a time when there are many people of perverse views who slander the law, then shakabuku should come first, as described in the Never Disparaging chapter. It is like using cold water to cool yourself in the hot weather, or longing for a fire when the weather turns cold. Grass and trees are kindred to the sun. They suffer in the cold moonlight. Bodies of water are followers of the moon. They lose their true nature when the hot weather comes. In the latter day of the law, however, both shoju and shakabuku are to be used. This is because there are two kinds of countries. The country that is passively evil and the kind that actively seeks to destroy the law. We must consider carefully to which category Japan at present time belongs. Question at the top of page 285, second column. If one applies the shakabuku method at a time when the shoju method would be appropriate, or shoju at the time when shakabuku would be appropriate, is there any merit to be gained? Answer, the Nirvana Sutra says, Bodhisattva Keshayapa addressed the Buddha saying, the Dharma body of the thus come one is as indestructible as a diamond, but I do not yet understand the means by which you acquired it. Would you tell me? The Buddha replied, Keshayapa, it is because I was a defender of the correct teaching that I have been able to attain this diamond-like body. Keshayapa, because in the past I devoted myself to the correct teaching, I have been able to achieve this diamond-like body that abides forever and is never destroyed. Good man, defenders of the correct teaching need not observe the 5 precepts or practice the rules of proper behavior. Rather, they should carry knives and swords, bows and arrows. The monks whom you are speaking of preach various teachings, but still they are not able to utter the lion's roar, nor are they able to refute and convert evil persons who go against the correct teaching. Monks of this kind can bring no benefit either to themselves or to the populace. You should realize that they are in fact shirkers and idlers. Though they are careful in observing the precepts and maintain spotless conduct, you should realize that they cannot achieve anything. Then a monk raises the lion's roar. Those who break the precepts upon listening to this teaching are all enraged to the point where they attack him. This preacher of the law, though he may in the end lose his life, is still worthy of being called a person who observes the precepts and brings benefit to both others, himself and others. In the passage from On the Nirvana Sutra, quoted earlier, Chang'an says, you should let your choices be fitting and never adhere solely to one or the other. And Tentai, as we have seen, declared that the method chosen should be that which accords with the time. If it is not, you will be like someone who planted seeds at the end of autumn. Though you may carefully tend to the field, you are not likely to harvest any rice or grain. During the Kinnin era, 1201 to 1204, 2 men came to prominence, Honen and Dainichi, who spread the teachings of the Nimbutsu and Zen schools respectively. Honen denied the worth of the Lotus Sutra now that the world has entered the latter day of the law, saying that not a single person has ever attained Buddhahood through that sutra, and that not even 1 person in 1,000 can be saved by its teachings. Dainichi, for his part, claimed that the true teachings of Buddhism had been transmitted apart from the sutras. These 2 doctrines have now spread throughout the entire country. The learned priests of the Tendai and True Word schools fawn on the lay supporters of the Nimbutsu and Zen schools the way a dog wags its tail before its master, or fear them the way a mouse fears a cat. These men enter the service of the ruler and the military leader, where they preach in such a way as to bring about the destruction of the Buddhist law and the ruin of the country. These Tendai and True Word leaders in their present existence will fall into the realm of hungry spirits and, after death, will find themselves in the Avicii hell. Even if they retire to the mountain forest and engage intensely in the meditation on the 3,000 realms in a single moment of life, or retire to a quiet spot and concentrate on the 3 mysteries of body, mouth, and mind. If they do not understand the time or the people's capacity and perceive which of the 2 methods, shoju or shakabuku, is appropriate, then they can never free themselves from the sufferings of birth and death. Question: when you berate the followers of the Nimbutsu and Zen schools and arouse their enmity, what merit does that bring? Answer: the Nirvana Sutra says, if even a good monk sees someone destroying the teaching and disregards him, failing to reproach him, to oust him, or to punish him for his offense, then you should realize that that monk is betraying the Buddha's teaching. But if he ousts the destroyer of the law, reproaches him, or punishes him, then he is my disciple and a true voice hearer. Chang'an comments on this as follows. One who destroys or brings confusion to the Buddha's teachings is betraying them. If one befriends another person but lacks the mercy to correct him, one is in fact his enemy. But one who reprimands and corrects an offender is a voice hearer who defends the Buddha's teachings, a true disciple of the Buddha. One who rids the offender of evil is acting as his parent. Those who reproach offenders are disciples of the Buddha, but those who do not oust offenders are betraying the Buddha's teachings. If we examine the Treasure Tower chapter of the Lotus Sutra, we find Shakyamuni Many Treasures Buddha and the Buddhas of the 10 directions, who are emanations of Shakyamuni Buddha, gathering together. And why? As the sutra itself says, each has come to this place on purpose to make certain the law will long endure. Shakyamuni Many Treasures and the other Buddhas intend to ensure the future propagation of the Lotus Sutra so that it can be made available to all the children of the Buddha in the times to come. We may surmise from this that their concern and compassion are even greater than those of a father and mother who see their only child afflicted with great suffering. Honen, however, shows not the least concern about their compassion, but would tightly shut the gates to the Lotus Sutra in the latter day of the law so that no one would have access to it. Like a person who tricks a demented child into throwing away a treasure, he tries to induce people to discard the Lotus Sutra, a shameless thing to do indeed. If someone is about to kill your father and mother, shouldn't you try to warn them? If a bad person who is insane with drink is threatening to kill his father and mother, shouldn't you try to stop him? If some evil person is about to set fire to the temples and pagodas, shouldn't you try to stop him? If your only child is gravely ill, shouldn't you try to cure him or her with moxibustion treatment? To fail to do so is to act like those people who see but do not try to put a stop to the Zen and the Butsu followers in Japan. As Chang'an says, if one befriends another person but lacks the mercy to correct him, one is in fact his enemy. And he's talking about Shakabuku all the way here. I, Nichiren, am sovereign, teacher, and father and mother to all the people of Japan. But the men of the Tendai school who do not refute misleading teachings are all great enemies of the people. As Chang'an has noted, one who rids the offender of evil is acting as his parent. One who has not conceived a desire for the way can never free from oneself from the sufferings of birth and death. Shakyamuni Buddha, the Lord of Teachings, was cursed by all the followers of the non-Buddha schools and labeled as a man of great evil. The great teacher Tentai was regarded with intense enmity by the 3 schools of the south and the 7 schools of the north. And Tokuitsu of Japan criticized him for using his 3-inch tongue to try to destroy the 5-foot body of the Buddha. The great teacher Dengyo was disparaged by the priests of Nara, who said, Saicho has never been to the capital of Tang, China. But all of these abuses were incurred because of the Lotus Sutra, and they are therefore no shame to the men who suffered them. To be praised by fools, that is the greatest shame. Now that I, Nichiren, have incurred the wrath of the authorities, the priests of the Tendai and True Word schools are no doubt delighted. They are strange and shameless men. Shakyamuni Buddha appeared in the Sahe world. Kumarajiva journeyed to the Qin dynasty in China, and Dengyo likewise went to China, all for the sake of the Lotus Sutra. Aradeva and Arashima sacrificed their bodies. Bodhisattva Medicine King burned his arms as an offering, and Prince Jogu stripped off the skin on his hand and copied the sutra on it. Shakyamuni, when he was a bodhisattva, sold his flesh to make offerings, and another time when he was a bodhisattva named the aesthetic aspiration for the law, he used one of his bones as a pen to write down the Buddha's teaching. Tentai said that the method chosen should be that which accords with the time. The propagation of the Buddhist teachings should follow the time. For what I have done, I have been condemned to exile, but it is a small suffering to undergo in this present life and not one worth lamenting. In future lives, I will enjoy immense happiness, a thought that gives me great joy. Because of Shakabuku ends page 287. Thank you for sharing. We got it done in an hour.